Overnight, new developments in the Ebola outbreak. What we know about the journalist now infected with the virus.
We all need to be alert for it.
Here at home, what hospitals are doing to prepare for a worst-case scenario with Ebola coming to Minnesota.
Embarrassed on national TV, the Vikings were pounded by the Packers last night. A look at their painful loss from Lambeau.
And a very chilly start to our day and a cold weekend ahead. I heard someone, Ken Barlow, even using the S word a few minutes ago.
Is that the one we can say on TV or the one we can't?
I think we should ban all of them from television. Good morning and thanks for being with us. I'm Megan Newquist.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Eggert. It is Friday, October 3rd. Let's send it over to Ken now to tell us about that possible S word stuff.
The show. That's what I'm talking about. Here's the show. Nah, it didn't work. Snow, yes, in the forecast. 45 degrees in Buffalo, 47 in Minneapolis. About the high temperatures for the day today. 37 up in Detroit Lakes, 39 in Roseau. This part of the state, Alexandria, just north of St. Cloud, to Hibbing, to Bemidji, to Detroit Lakes, could see white lawns by morning. Here's the wind, the other part of the equation, gusting over 30 miles per hour just about everywhere. A little weak at Cambridge, but you'll pick up shortly. That's blowing in the cold air, blowing in the wind chill, and we're going to see again the wind pick up at New Richmond and Red Wing very shortly. Snow showers in the forecast for the Twin Cities. I'll talk about that, when to expect them, when I come back in just a couple of minutes.
All right, 5:31 is the time. Let's get to Josie. We know a lot of construction issues this morning. How's traffic flow being affected by things?
Yeah, good morning, Megan. So far, it's not too rough out there. I'm hoping that because it's Friday that maybe we'll have a little bit lighter than normal traffic volume. We'll see what happens. Let's take a peek at that map and see how we're doing overall. In 494 in both directions from Cedar Avenue to 212, it's still moving along at the posted speeds. Highway 100 in good shape between 494 and 394. If you take Highway 7, MnDOT says they have a lane closure eastbound that will be in place until the end of this month. Out to our cameras in southbound 35W. It's looking a little bit crowded, but basically you're still holding up at the posted speeds. As we travel to the South Metro and see how things are moving in Burnsville, not bad at all. That's northbound 35E traffic from McAndrews. And 394, that's a pretty good looking drive out there. Both directions of 394 Worth Parkway. At this point, it's problem free. A couple of major projects happening this weekend, and I'll have details, Chris, in just a few minutes.
Okay, Josie, we'll see you then. New from overnight, there were 2 pedestrians hit within hours in downtown Minneapolis in separate incidents. First happened around 2 o'clock on First Avenue. One person was taken to the hospital with minor injuries. Minneapolis police say 3 people were arrested in connection to that. The second happened around 3 o'clock on LaSalle and 8th. A female was hit and taken to HCMC with serious injuries. The drivers in both incidents are cooperating with police.
New developments in the Ebola outbreak this morning. An American journalist has been infected with the virus while in Africa. His name is Ashoka Mukpo. He is on his way back to the U.S. for treatment.
5 Eyewitness News reporter Brandy Powell live in the newsroom with the latest. Brandy.
Well, Chris, the American freelance photojournalist is now the 5th U.S. citizen to be diagnosed with Ebola. The 2 aid workers, 1 doctor, and an unnamed American who got the virus have all survived. Ashoka Mukpo, seen here in Facebook photos, quarantined himself and was admitted to a medical clinic in Liberia quickly. He's a freelance video photographer with NBC News who'd been covering the Ebola epidemic in Liberia. Meantime, Texas health officials say they've identified an at-risk group of at least a dozen people who had direct contact with Ebola patient Thomas Eric Duncan. This includes an ambulance crew and a handful of Dallas area students. Now, Duncan's relatives are speaking out. His nephew says he was the one who called the CDC after a Dallas emergency department initially turned Duncan away.
Whose responsibility is that? Do I need to call CDC again?
Now, crew is expected to return today to clean the woman's apartment who Duncan stayed with earlier this week, according to a Dallas City spokesperson. This after a crew finally went to her home yesterday. At that time, officials realized the workers didn't have the required permit to clean and remove hazardous waste.
You cannot go and clean the school 5 and 10 miles away with bleach and disinfectant and then leave, the apartment ground zero, where the problem is dirty.
And Liberian authorities say they plan to prosecute Duncan for lying on his airport questionnaire. Duncan said he did not have contact with people infected with Ebola before flying to the United States, and that was not the case. Megan.
All right. Brandy, back here at home, we know that some hospitals are preparing for Ebola in the event that it were to come here. 5 Eyewitness News reporter Jennifer Ann Wilson joining us now with more on what our local hospitals are doing.
Yeah, well, as Brandy has told us earlier this week and even today, in the first case in the U.S. in Dallas, when that all happened, there was a big mistake made at the hospital that escalated the entire situation. The patient told his nurse he had just been to Africa, and the nurse didn't share that information and instead sent him home. And that's a mistake local hospitals say they do not want to repeat. Hennepin County Medical Center held its first Ebola drill to test procedures just earlier this week, just hours before finding out about the first U.S. case in Dallas. And other hospitals have done similar things to prepare. Regions Hospital has been preparing for the possibility of the arrival of the Ebola virus since June, holding its first 6-hour-long drill to test procedures just weeks later for patients that end up at Regions. Now, there is a list of questions they ask of every patient, including questions about recent travel. The hospital has dedicated a special decontamination room, even prepared an Ebola crash cart of sorts. It's full of supplies needed to treat a patient safely.
We try to make it as easy as possible. If a patient would come in, that we would be prepared. We have a manual about how to deal with an Ebola patient that we put together. We have kits with all the gown and mask that a person would need to wear to go into the room with that patient.
So, as I mentioned, other hospitals in the area have taken similar steps, the list of questions, doing drills, just to make sure they are ready in case it happens.
So it's great that they have these drills, that they've had these drills, they have these kind of protocols in place. Have they had to use any of this?
You know, actually, Regions Hospital has. Now, they haven't had a case of Ebola, just to say that straight up off front, but they did see a patient with similar symptoms they thought could be Ebola, so they went through the entire protocol, the entire procedures. They really got to use, put everything that they had been practicing into action. Fortunately, that patient did not have Ebola, had something else. But that word Ebola is now just really striking a lot of fear.
Well, and you brought it up in the last half hour. I mean, the population of those from West Africa and Minnesota is so huge that the likelihood that it would come here is very real. The threat of it is very real.
It's very real.
Great that hospitals are doing drills and have protocols in place.
Yeah,
Jennifer.
and there are people in town who that word Ebola is just really pretty scary. And so actually coming up the next half an hour, we'll talk to a man who lives here who has very personal experience with this virus.
Okay, we'll talk to you then. Thank you. All right, now let's talk about the respiratory virus that is sickening people all across the country. Wisconsin has now confirmed it has 5 cases of enterovirus 68. Now, most of these involve young children. Nationwide, 4 people who were infected with the illness have died. At least 500 people in 42 states have now gotten sick. There is a new study from the CDC that shows the number of deaths from heroin overdoses doubled in just 2 years. Researchers looked at 28 states and they found that deaths rose from almost 1,800 to nearly 3,700 between 2010 and 2012. Experts believe that one of the reasons these deaths are on the rise is because people are getting hooked on prescription painkillers and then moving on to heroin.
5:37 is the time. Topping headlines around the world this morning. New overnight, Australia became the newest nation to join the fight against ISIS. The country will launch airstrikes in Iraq. 6 fighter jets had already been on standby in the United Arab Emirates. The Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, said the deployment in Iraq could be a long process. Australia's National Security Committee approved the deployment after an official request was received from Iraq overnight. U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel says he is confident that ISIS can be defeated. Hagel met with his French counterpart to discuss the international efforts to take down the militants. France is launching airstrikes in Iraq, but they have not yet given their support to do the same in Syria. Both the United States and France said that the fight against ISIS is